Welcome. Would like to first of all tell you that Danny Brager's not here. Our friend Danny had a family commitment that he had to go to involving his granddaughter. So Danny made the right choice and decided to do that instead of coming here. MJ and I are going to talk to you about, first of all, what's happening in the marketplace. I'm going to cover that. I'm going to move through it pretty quickly. And then we're going to hand it over to MJ. And MJ is going to talk about really just tactically how to go after it. And when we start thinking about the challenges we're facing, what are we going to do? So with that, thank you for being here. We very much appreciate the time to do this.
One thing we do want to say is we made Danny
microphone
work on all of this, so he's actually here with us.
That's right. I will use the word we a lot, and that is really all of us doing this work together. We do use multiple data sources, and we believe that using multiple data sources is really important to understanding it. If you're only using one data source to understand the market, chances are you don't understand the market. So as you look at this, we have a number of data sets that we use. First thing, and also terminology. Shipment is the transaction from a supplier to a wholesaler. Then we look at depletion data via SIP source. That is an aggregation of depletion data. So we have 15 wholesalers who contribute that data. It covers a large part of the market. That's the transaction between a wholesaler and either a retailer or a restaurateur, somebody out there with a license. And then, of course, we want consumer takeout. That's what we get from the NIQ, formerly Nielsen. And it's always important to understand what's happening with direct-to-consumer business. And we use mostly wine business, SAVO ship compliant reporting for that. Three quick things. First thing I would tell you is that I've never seen more activity about writing about what's happening in the marketplace. What are trends doing? Which way are they going? What's happening to that? It's a very active space on opinions and what's going on. Second thing I would say is the wine business is not dying. And we hear this horrible thing. However, we have to accept that there's some challenges that are out there, and we need to address that. The answer is somewhere in that continuum in the middle on what's happening. Third thing I would say is it's never been harder to get a read as to what is happening in the marketplace and what that looks like. And one of the reasons that it's been very, very hard is because it used to be so easy to understand what was happening in the marketplace. If you look at this slide, this is shipment data. So this is supplier to wholesaler. It also includes DTC, so it really is all-encompassing from Gomberg, Ferguson, or BW166. As you can see here, from 2003 to 2018, the wine industry grew at a compound annual growth rate of about 2.4%. So you could pretty much bank on the wine category volumetrically growing somewhere between 1.5% to 3%. It was like an annuity. It just happened every year. You were going to get that. On top of that, you were going to get revenue growth in advance of that because the category was premiumizing. We then had this thing called COVID. Well, first thing I'll point out, right at the tip of the arrow, you see that line, the bar start to go down on the shipments. A bunch of us noticed this. That we thought that, man, we've had a category that has been very predictable. About 2018 started to show some softness. And we started to voice some concern and talk about what that looked like. All at once COVID hits, everything goes crazy. You see this mass explosion of shipments where that climb was very, very steep. Some of that was inventory build. Some of that was consumption. So some of that all did happen. But also what you see here is from 2018 to 2023, the net is that the category has been down 1.8% compound annual growth rate. So every year it's been down just under 2% on an average basis. So where does that leave us? Right now, if we look at this and we think about what's happening, I have to move closer because my teleprompter is really small. First thing that I would tell you, wine is a mature category. We were a growth category, but the category exploded. Thank you, that's helpful. It's just not going to grow to the levels that it was. Growth is going to be muted. I'm not saying there's never going to be growth, but it's just not going to be that consistent area that let us literally in a 25-year period double the size of the wine business. Question we all have to ask ourselves is, did we overbuild? Right? And I'm reading a lot about vineyard coming out. There's a lot of things that are going on. Did we overbuild? The other thing, and heard Ben Dollard say this morning, right? There's going to be winners. We're talking about macro category trends, but there are going to be overperformers. There are going to be people who are going to be beating trends. And that's always going to happen. But on the other end of that means there's some people that are going to have much, much softer business. When I look at the marketplace, product choices are plentiful. The number of products that are out there is insane. That includes traditional alcoholic beverages. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we'll also talk about things that are beyond beverage alcohol that do impact the category. Economic pressures are high. Inflation is strong. Heard the report as I was driving over this morning and basically reviewing, because we just got new numbers for inflation, right? Those just came out. And everybody's like, they weren't that bad. And like, that's great. But, one of the persons, the analyst, pointed out, yeah, but they didn't get better, right? So it's not like we're going backwards. Inflation is still an issue. And then interest rates, right? Everybody who's working off a line of credit, the service on your line of credit changed, and it's changed a lot. And that changed for the retailer. It's changed for everybody with those interest rates being as high as they are. It's also led to significant consumer debt. The consumer has more debt than they have ever had. That is on a broad basis. So that puts pressure on the consumer in addition to the inflation, which I saw one stat that was 5 years ago, if you were to go buy, if you spent $100 on a bag of groceries 5 years ago, that $100 now costs you $133. Okay, significant move within that. And then those consumer pressures also are relevant for us as a category. We're facing demographic pressures. We'll talk about that. And consumer confidence has been all over the map. At the end of last year, we started seeing consumer confidence indexes trickle up. Now those consumer confidence indexes are coming down. Consumer confidence indexes don't equal spending power, but there's something interesting to watch that gives you a mood as to what's happening with the consumer. I'm going to jump around all over the place on the things that I just talked about and give you examples of what we're seeing. This is from Nielsen Household Panel, NIQ Household Panel. And really what it shows is that today's consumer buys across all three categories. If you go back to 2010, 23% of the households bought all three beer, wine, spirit categories. That's now 40% of the households. And by the way, currently 65% of the spending in the beverage alcohol category is within those households that buy all three. So we're seeing that the consumer today is very fickle. They drink across all of those categories. In addition to that, the categories are going crazy. Every time my friend Danny updates this slide, I have to ask him what that is. What is that? Because there's something new on this slide. Who would have thunk that Sonic, the drive-in, needed a hard seltzer? Right? That was interesting to me. Do you really need a hard latte, Rebel, down there? Right? So these choices are out there. They're plentiful, and they're continuing to expand. In the spirits RTD category, there's now over 500 brands in that category. Really was almost nascent 5 years ago. 500 brands in that segment. There's also additional pressure outside the category. A lot of examples up here about reducing alcohol, and that there is an anti-alcohol movement that is out there. We're seeing that. There was a question this morning for Ben on dietary guidelines. We need to rally beer, wine, spirits as an industry, make sure that those don't change like they did in Canada. I have something like hard kombucha up there. For that relaxation moment, there's people who are choosing hard kombucha instead of wine, right? There are moments out there that those categories are slipping in there. You have the diet drugs, the Ozempics, right? Certainly reduces appetite, also told that it does reduce alcohol consumption. And then you've got cannabis. And cannabis comes in many, many forms, THC, so on and so forth. Hard to say really what's happening there. I do think it impacts the beer category most of beer, wine, and spirits. But what we know is it's not helping the category, right? It's not helping the wine category in any way, shape, or form. 2023 was a difficult year. It was a difficult year for all beverage alcohol. The blue box represents beer trend, the red one is wine, and the green one represents core spirits. Core spirits are basically taking the ready-to-drink category out. So that's just your standard vodka, rum, gin, vodka, whiskey, so on and so forth. And you can see here that every one of those was down. It was down in shipments, it was down in depletions, and they were down in retail sales. We use, for the depletion data, we use SipSource, and our friends at the Beer Institute give us depletion data for that. Retail sales were down. That's the middle part. And then we also saw DTC volume down. And we are having to adjust to that, right? That all at once, the DTC market isn't going to show the growth that it once did. It has continued. That was calendar year 2023. If we look at what's happening with depletion trends for core spirits, wine, and beer, they have remained soft. These are 12-month rolling numbers. So as we look at this, the category is still soft. We're just not seeing that improvement jump back up. When we look at it, the wine category from a price tier standpoint, that left-hand part of it, and the way you read this, the bar represents the share of market of total wine, and the dots and the numbers represent the trend versus last year. We have to remember that so much volume is still done under $8. There's a lot of very big brands over there that do a lot of business. That category has been down and shrinking in the long term. It's going to continue to do so. Makes it hard to get to an overall growth number. Way out to the right-hand side, $25.50. Really over $25. Those segments have been very volatile. 3 years ago, we saw huge growth in them. Last year, we saw significant declines. They're jumping around. We're really seeing a lot of volatility in the depletion data within that area. The most stable part really is the $11 to $25. That $11 to $25 segment has been the most stable, and even though the numbers are negative, they are performing at a better pace. That seems to be the pricing standpoint. That's all three-tier, right? That's looking at what's happening in three-tier. If we go over and we think about DTC, quite the opposite. This is in dollars, but dollars in DTC, it all goes out to the right-hand side. We see the higher end, it's a bigger portion of DTC, and naturally, it's growing. It is doing well. It is continuing to expand. However, and I think this is something that MJ will talk about that's really important. As you go further into that, to the right, from left to right, your audience is getting smaller. The percentage of the population who drinks over $100 wines is very, very small. So you have to be able to target them and pinpoint them. DTC was down in volume. And it only was up because of price increases. And you can see here that the average price total DTC, the average price was up 7.1%, average price $48.35. You can see the other regions there and what those look like. So everywhere really had a big price increase in DTC last year. Some of that was mix, some of it was price increases. Both of those contributed to dollar contribution, but volume still continues to struggle and is still down. Some details on inflation. The peak of inflation really was December of 2022, the end of 2022. And you can see that the consumer price index at that point was up 6.5%. It's now down to 3.4% with the April numbers. However, remember that 3.4% is on top of that 6.5, right? It's a compounding measure. Over there to the right, you can see what happens with beverage alcohol and how that goes. Beer has always been the best at raising prices. Wine and spirits, we're really not getting much price inflation right now showing up in these numbers. Also important to note, on-premise and the inflation rate in the on-premise. So what they do is look at it, what is the inflation trend for at-home consumption? That's the at-home one. And the one that's away from home, you can see, and this has been very consistent, in the on-premise, the prices are going up, and they continue to compound at a much, much faster rate than they do at the take-home. That's putting a lot of stress on the on-premise. Talk a little bit about that. In times of inflation, and in times of high prices, what does our category look like compared to wine, spirits, and then we have the RTD space out there on a cost per serving basis? This is very simply taking the average price of the product, dividing it by the 5-ounce serving. And it's not like we picked luxury items here, right? Again, this is my friend Danny's slide as we go across it. These are middle of the road items, everyday items. And you can see that the wine category is the most expensive. That's a difficult place to be for that consumer who is really watching their money. We have heard in previous jobs when I did consumer research, we heard people talk about buzz for dollar, right? What am I going to get? I'm going there because I can get it a higher delivery of alcohol via that. This is from VIP. They help us with SIP source data, number of active accounts in the marketplace. The darker color is on-premise accounts. The lighter one is retail accounts. And an active account, good news about the VIP data, is they do depletion processing for the entirety of the beverage alcohol category. So this includes places where beer's delivered. They have a contract with Monster, so it's got a bunch of non-alcoholic products in there. Net of it is to be an active account, all you have to do is buy one case from one wholesaler in a 30-day period and you're an active account. You saw what happened there during COVID. We saw that horrible shrink. Notice, though, that even 19 and 20, we were seeing a deceleration in accounts, that the number of accounts was coming down. After COVID, we saw that grow back up, really has stabilized right now. About 2% fewer accounts in the marketplace than there were pre-COVID. We're seeing this number fluctuate a fair bit. The other thing I would say is that within the on-premise side of this thing, what we're seeing is a reduction in the number of fine dining accounts and an increase in the number of casual dining accounts. So the overall idea of a fine dining experience is really getting crunched. There are many fewer fine wine accounts, which would be a target for a lot of our products, than there used to be. This is a little fact little interesting data set we came across. Census Bureau, forever and a day, has gone to beverage wholesalers every month and asked them to give them two numbers. What's your inventory level? And what were your sales for the last month? They collect that data and they report it out. This goes back to 1992. And what we see back there from 1992 up through, I'm going to move closer, 2007, the ratio of inventory was 1.13 versus sales. So basically for every dollar of sales that the wholesaler, and this is beer, wine, and spirits, for every dollar I sold, I had $1.13 worth of inventory on hand. Then we go there and we see a little bit of a jump, and we go from 2007 up to 2022. That ratio moved to 1.29. So now for every dollar of sales I have $1.29 of inventory. Some of that was driven by the premiumization in the categories, also the proliferation of brands and products that were coming in. Well, in 2021-22, we now see from now until today, that ratio is 1.61. Net of it is the wholesaler is sitting on extra inventory. The wholesaler has a lot of inventory that they're trying to move. came down in the month of March. We haven't gotten April numbers yet. We expect that they will continue to come down, and this number is going to come down. But this is further going to put a cramp in trying to get shipments into wholesalers. We do believe that a lot of that inventory is high-end spirits, because we saw high-end spirits really reduce the most, high-end tequila, high-end whiskey, and cognac mostly. But this could affect your shipment opportunities because the wholesaler has more inventory than they would like to have. Core wine consumer. We've heard about this. You guys have probably heard about this ad nauseum. You're sick of it. The wine consumer's old. La-da-da, la-da-da. It's true. And we have to appeal to younger consumers. I thought what Ben Dollard showed this morning was fabulous, right? I think there's some things that they're doing, and we have to think in those terms. Same story, multicultural. Here we go with multicultural. Yes, you've heard about it. To me, the big takeaway from this, though, is that look how balanced spirits is. That the spirits category is really, really balanced. And this is an index of the percentage of the population versus the percentage of consumption within those categories. So we believe that spirits are better suited to win long term. When you look at it, people who are turning 21 today, one of every two people who turns 21 today is multicultural. All right? So as we look at this, the wine category relies on white population. The spirits business is really balanced here. They've got a great balance on that. I thought it was interesting, again, in Ben's presentation this morning, talked about Snoop Dogg and how in 2020, Snoop Dogg started talking to that community and communicating with them. Spirits industry's been doing it forever. The spirits industry got here the old-fashioned way. They marketed to multicultural consumers and were very good at it. They are best suited to win long-term. Number of wineries. I'm going as fast as I can, MJ. This is number of wineries. Purely, how many registered wineries are out there? And if you go from 2013 up through 2020, remember that green line I had on shipments? That green line in shipments is almost identical to the green line on the number of wineries that have opened. So between 2023 and 2020, we saw compound annual growth rate. Every year you added about 5.1% more wineries. 2021 to 2023, that's now down to 1.7. And we see here that in 2023, under 1% expansion in wineries. On a WIN conference, or the bold predictions, my bold prediction is that next year we'll have fewer wineries. That 2024, we will likely have fewer wineries, fewer registered wineries than we did. That's uncomfortable. That's not a great place to be, right? But I also think about my old days as a Lean Six Sigma black belt and looking at a production process. And your goal is to get as much out of a process out of the back end as you can. Well, the idea of putting more things into the process at the front end only crams up that process. It doesn't make it better. So when we talk about overbuilt, this is probably a place where we're overbuilt as well. Probably too many wineries out there, and that's something we're going to have to think about and sadly going to have to live through. Point of this chart, if you look at where those were, over 70% of the wineries that opened during that period are under 1,000 case wineries. They're small wineries, right? So it is a lot of small things, and that kind of goes back to my process. Trying to put a whole bunch of little things into the front of a process, hoping to get more out of the back, tends to clog up your production line and tends to make things more difficult. I think the one thing that will potentially change that, there's a lot of wine out there right now. There's a lot of bulk wine. There's excess wine out there. That tends to have people start new brands and start new things and find new places to put things. So we could see that this is the one thing that I think about when what would stop us from reducing wineries. This is the one that really hits it. Summation. Number one, the wine category is unlikely to grow in the medium term. This is a great category. It is a big category. It's a great category to be in. Love being in the wine business. But it's unlikely to grow in the near and probably the medium term. The $8 segment remains very large. It's not going to grow. Any growth is going to be at the higher end, and some of that is struggling. The $15 to $25 segment looks to be the most stable. The wine category is very attractive to the consumer. Think about the things we have. Sustainable farming. It's a natural product. We have great experiences. We need to figure out how to make that resonate. But also, the wine category remains very attractive to the trade, to the retailer. It is a high margin category. When you're trying to sell a whole bunch of canned green beans, and you're trying to sell Tide soap, the margin in the wine category is really attractive. Our consumer is a large spending consumer. They buy other high profit and high ring goods. That's important to the retailer. We need to continue to emphasize that and talk more about that. However, my view, the next 3 to 5 years are not going to be for the faint of heart. It's going to be a slog out there. Our category, we need to figure out how we better target effectively, get after it, and really also communicate the benefits better on a macro level of what the wine category is and what it can do. With that, thank you, and I am going to turn it over to MJ to talk about how to really think about the wine consumer and targeting that wine consumer on a micro level.
Woo. Thank you, Dale. Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's going to be challenging in the years ahead. But what gives me confidence is every industry goes through this at some point. You mature, and we're an impressive industry. We're an 8,000-year-old industry. We're not going anywhere. The difference is we all now need to up our game and not just modify our story like we've been hearing from others, but understand the story of our consumers, our customers. I've heard people talking about, Heather at Rombauer was talking about one customer at a time. Well, today that's possible. You know, we'll jump into our slides. So here's the universe of beverage alcohol consumers in the United States. And Dale, you're absolutely right. It's not just wine, it's wine, beer, and spirits. And every wine brand, big or small, knows a lot about a few of their TDC customers. We also know, with winery data and outside data now from multiple sources, plus in business intelligence, you can know a lot about every single DTC consumer. I mean a lot, and we'll show you in a minute. But you can do this even with customers at wholesale. So always before, people are like, oh, well, that's DTC. We want to be successful at wholesale as well. Well, your DTC customer is your wholesale customer. They're one and the same, and we see in the data today at the level of one, the customer is shopping across categories, and they're in restaurants, and they're in your tasting rooms, and they're buying online. You need to meet them where and when they are. But it's possible. And the more you know about your customers, the easier it is to prioritize your sales and marketing actions successfully. And this is what happens in other industries. Because we've been in a growth cycle and focused on our product, we've been waiting for people to come to us. So what does this look like? There's extensive ROI opportunity for every wine business with customers at the level of one or many. So here's Dana Parks. Her current value score is 54, but her potential based on outside data is a 96. Her engagement score is a 47. She's fine. Her key interests are skiing, tennis, and financial newsletters. ROI action, with that kind of opportunity you haven't tapped yet, immediately a $50 loyalty reward, exclusive VIP event invitations. She's not a club member, you missed her. Promote to concierge sales team. She'll perform if you bring and focus on her as an individual. Next slide. So the road to enhance DTC profitability, I'll come down here, hopefully this still works so I can see what you're seing. is combining data. Winery data, your data is as important as your vineyards and your inventory. Don't lose it, don't throw it away, keep it. Then there's DTC shipping data. So with our partner, Sovo Ship Compliant, and this doesn't work so well because of feedback, so I'll come back a bit. There's also national US consumer data, which we work with, on 200 million consumers. Every 180 million beverage alcohol consumer is in there. And then there's technology. So this interface between data and technology, we're using AI and machine learning to find patterns we never knew existed. Business intelligence tools, big data infrastructure is now much more affordable, and things like our platform that we use at Customer Vineyard, but there's other ways to do it too. And by the way, this isn't just for big companies, it works for small. The other thing to remember is knowing your customer, if you're a really small brand, can be done by hiring an intern this summer to go online and learn and build a dossier on every one of your top customers. So the message today works for all of us. It's really important for our businesses to be successful, but there's a path, whatever size business you are. Okay, so let's do a spotlight. Part of what we had talked about doing, some of this has been presented already, but we also did some special work today. George asked us to drill down on different types of wine consumers by price point and varietal, Napa versus Sonoma. But just to let you understand, first let's understand more, where are the highest spending DTC consumers? That's a good thing to know, right? And I was happy to hear people starting to talk about taking things on the road, because this is why. So here we're looking at 11 million DTC wine consumers spending almost $10 billion in the last 5 years. I don't think anybody in this room, no matter how big your company is, has all 10 billion of those customers working with you. There is opportunity. There's lots of opportunity. But let's look further. What about the top 10%? So this is rarefied air. This is the top million, where they live and where their wine shipments go. They spent $7.2 billion in the last 5 years. What if you drill down further geographically? The top 10% of DTC wine consumers in the Northeast. Well, we see them, of course, around New York, but there's pockets between Boston, Bridgeport. It's possible to bring your experience to them and your product to them where they are, but you got to be strategic. And actually, the answer is different by brand. So in this case, this is actually a use case for one client that has decided to put DTC staff out where the customers reside, to hold local regional events. With their brand, they had a lot of opportunity and natural growth in the Northeast. That's where they made the choice. But for a different brand, it was a different decision. So it was Texas. Their brand resonated in Texas. They found lots of opportunity. Same thing, they wanted to hold special events and understand where their best customers were and where the best opportunity, not their customers today, resides. Getting the picture? Okay, how about another use case? What was the average price paid by DTC consumers by age across varietals? This was to help a client that was thinking about a new product introduction, and for us also to understand what's happening with the younger consumer. So this was the average price paid by varietal, by age group. And you can see the younger consumer, 21 to 25, is a small player in DTC. By the way, they're in retail, and they're in restaurants, and they are buying DTC. But we see Cabernet Sauvignon playing a disproportionately big role in terms of price paid, right? But we learned here that as the consumer is growing up, the younger consumer had a different varietal preferences. They were more into blends, as well as others. Next page. So where is there opportunity? We say, oh no, we're losing the younger consumer. Well, data will tell you wherever there's a trend, there's also opportunity. So in fact, we went in and drilled down on the cities with the greatest age 30 to 40 spending growth in DTC in the last 5 years. So this is the top 10% only. And then next slide, Louisville, Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky, Hudson, Ohio, a number of places in California. It matters when you're looking at specific data, how to build your brand, your product strategy, your channel strategy, but it starts with your customer, not the wine you make. Okay, next slide. So now let's look at consumers of just California wine. Now we're only looking at we've gone into this data set, we've worked with our partners, where DTC consumers of just California wine reside. So most of us in this room are California. This is where they are based on spend in the last 5 years again. And you know California is the biggest by population in the country, but we are disproportionately selling wines to ourselves, whereas Texas, which is second in population, is not buying as much California wine proportionally. There may be more opportunity for us or not, but it's important to understand where are we already successful and where might we go based on population and other people. Okay, so what appellations and wines are consumers of California wine buying? So this is a little bit of, we call it the show-off slide, because we've now gone down to every single bottle of wine. This SHIP compliant has about 80% of the data through compliance checking. This is all anonymized. So where, by appellation, is wine being delivered in the United States? So let's look at Napa Valley, because I saw a lot of people here from Napa Valley. Well, we see wine going to the western region, actually the most of anywhere, and then decent balance across every other region. Let's go and look at, okay, Alexander Valley. Here I see it's almost pretty even. Pop down to Central Coast or somewhere else. Way more indexing on the West. There's much more opportunity outside of the West Coast for the Central Coast. We can also look by sales. So how is it going on a percentage basis? Here's Napa, 32% to the west, right? How does that compare with Sonoma? 35. So we're a bit more reliant on the West Coast here in Sonoma County. Central Coast, 53% of sales, and so on. So again, that message is tying back to we have been really focused here where we already are and expected people to come to us. We can look at average price paid per bottle DTC by appellation for a California Cab and Chardonnay, and which appellations are commanding the highest price. This is super helpful if you're thinking about new products or your pricing strategy. You're looking at it on a large basis, but it helps you understand where to go and how to build your game plan. Next slide. Okay, so drill down on the consumer of all California wines. Now we're gonna look at the people themselves. What I've been telling you is so important. Okay, in general, their household income is a large percentage is over 150,000, but there are consumers playing across every price point. Across all California wine, it's pretty balanced, 53% female, 47% male. The age distribution, you can see there, we're a bit light on the front end. They jump into being a good buyer closer to 30 than they do 25 or 21. We'll talk about propensities in a minute, their spend by profession, and so on. We can see their social media usage because now we're putting together massive data sets, different data sets at the level of one and translating it back so we understand. And by the way, it's different for your brand than the brand next door. And it's different when we're looking at all California consumers. Okay, so we see Facebook, whoops, sorry, back there for a second, 39%. But LinkedIn at 60%. LinkedIn, think about it. Next page. So here's trends by occupation. Customers spend by profession. Well, this was a surprise to a number of different people that we work with, but lawyers are holding strong at number one, and they've been there since 2018. I asked this of another group. How many people have built relationships with the ABA, American Bar Association, or regional legal teams? Some have, but it's much more rare. We talk more about doctors, and for sure they're there, but the number 2 category is registered nurses for all California consumer wine shipped DTC. Are we focused there? Next page. So let's drill down further. Okay, George, these slides are for you. Now, this is where I'm telling you, you have the data at the bigger level, you can keep drilling further down to the level of one. Here we're looking at Napa Valley consumer of $150 plus wine. I think Cabernet in particular is what we're looking at here, versus Russian River Valley, and we took a lower price point just to show you the differences. So suddenly you see key differences in Napa Valley at the higher trophy price points. We have men at 65% versus women at 35%. But in the Russian River Valley, looking at Chardonnay, it's very close, 49%, 51%. Look at the age distribution differences. So if I'm talking with Russian River Valley and the lower price points, I would say a bit over-reliant on people ages 60 to 80. And it's not a bad thing. These are great consumers, but we do age out with time. And to have the higher proportion than Napa there isn't the best for the healthy ecosystem. Napa's doing a bit better, even at these really high-priced wines with people ages 40 to 60. A bigger percentage of their mix is with a younger consumer. So what's Napa doing, and how does Sonoma start to think and replicate that? Buying channels. We can look at where they buy not just wine, but all things. Napa is really comfortable, especially on the internet, but across the board. So we're not looking at their wine buying, they're just looking at all their purchasing habits as a consumer. Russian River Valley, less so across all those channels. They may actually be good in person. Next slide. Okay, now let's look at their key interests. And interests come from outside data, survey data, spending data. Like I will sometimes talk a good game, how much I like yoga, but how much have I actually made it to yoga? When you look at spending, that's one of the best categories you have. So green living, Russian River has a 40% greater interest. That 40% of all people purchasing from there has a high interest in green living. We talked about sustainability. This is a way of life for this consumer. Whereas 32% for Napa, still important. Environmental issues, 24% versus 17% for the Napa consumer of the high-end cab. Upscale living, well, no surprise, Napa Valley at 40% versus 37%. Biking and mountain biking. Again, I'm showing you differences. It seems like small percentages, but that's thousands and thousands of consumers different, right? So biking and mountain biking, this gives a nod to Russian River Valley. Boating and sailing, a nod to Napa. Camping and hiking, what are your brands thinking about with your consumers? How can you build events or experiences more matched with them, not just yourself? Scuba diving, 1% and 2%. I love this one. It doesn't seem like that big, but there is something there in the data. And are you a brand that could rock or sell this? Are you close enough to the coast? There's pockets of people. No one else is focusing on scuba divers, but it's a very high cost sport. These are people that are healthy and interested and live life to the fullest, and they're wine drinkers. Cat owners, bigger for the Russian River Valley consumer than Napa. Cultural and artistic living, a little bit neck and neck, but more for the Russian River Valley. So other things, it goes on and on. I mean, we look at 16,000 possible pieces of information down to the level of one. There's about 1,500 we're focused on. So the Napa Valley consumer is more likely to buy designer couture items. They are a heavy Zoom user. They're on it a lot. They have traveled for business 3 trips to other countries in the past 12 months for business, not pleasure. Upscale hotel, they have a Marriott flag, literally Marriott, down to that level. Beach vacation lover, they're 1.5 times more likely than the Russian River consumer to be a beach vacation lover. A luxury shopper, their annual spend, very high on liquors, spirits, not just wine. Visit the southern United States, that they're likely to do this in the next 12 months and be in top management. Russian River Valley consumer, now if you're playing in a lower price Chardonnay, watch the cooking channel. Winery, distillery, brewery tours, remember how we said they might be more interested in person? They are. Social media entertainment, watch TV clips on social media. Finds advertising amusing on the radio. Read circulars, inserts, flyers in a weekday newspaper. Some brand customers do and some don't. Figure out what's best for you and then market there. Alcoholic beverage influencer, they're using social media and influencing others. They're more likely to retire. We saw that in the age demographics. Heavy Facebook. They buy, rent, stream videos from Netflix, and they exercise regularly. So they are more likely than Napa to be exercising. Okay, What about occupations? Remember we talked about the occupations at the big picture before with the caterpillar growing. Top 15, Napa versus Russian River. And we've indexed them by lifetime spend across Napa Valley, Cab, 150 and up, versus Chardonnay, $20 to $40. Number one, Napa, broker, stock, trader, $221,000 of lifetime spend averaged. Now we know there's people spending millions. That plays with the average. Lawyers holding strong at number two and not so far behind in terms of spending. Medical doctors coming in third. Presidents, insurance agents, who's focused there? I wasn't when I was running DTC for wine brands. Nurses, etc. Over here, you still have the broker stock trader, but registered nurses, as we said before, really coming in strong in Russian River. Lawyers, real estate agents have popped up. Doctors still there. There's the insurance agent again. Homemakers. Homemakers handle a lot of purchasing. And it may be somebody in their household is interested in the wine, and it may be themselves, but they are a consumer to be focused on and cater to. Okay, next slide. What do you do with all this data? You take different data sets. You understand at the level of one consumer. You go back and look at your customers from 10 years ago. They had a connection with you. They know your brand. You can bring them back to life. You just have to know where to focus and why. So if you always look at data in terms of three things, you're going to be really successful. Attract new customers like your very best. Sell more. Upsell the seemingly low value person to higher value. And then retain your best customers longer. It's 3 times more profitable to retain a customer than acquire a new one. Just be laser focused to re-enlist high potential customers you accidentally lost. These 3 things together make a big difference. So George asked us to show you a little bit about our platform, so we're not gonna film on this now, but as a company, we help businesses know and grow customers. We translate vast external data sets plus your winery data into unique customer scores and insights so you can easily find untapped potential at the level of one or many. We're close to the end and we can move towards questions, but I really want to encourage you because part of what was great is I grew up in the wine industry as a kid. All my first jobs were wine. I left and got all my training outside of wine. And I hit one industry after another that was in growth mode and then hit a troubled spot. What you learn is it's really, really possible to take what you think of as chaos and find opportunity. So game on. It's time for the wine industry to sort of up our game.
As we are literally you in lunch, I don't have the app to look at questions. Do you? Do we have any questions? Anybody would? What's that? I said do it the old-fashioned. Exactly. Yes.
Oh, here we go. Slide up.
What are the stats you said and percentage of people turning 21 right now that are multicultural? That's you.
Yeah, it's basically 1 out of every 2. If you look at where we are, and actually we did some work with a company called Ethnifax, and they would tell you that those that are going into a multicultural household is much bigger, right? Because not every household has 2 multicultural parents in it necessarily. So, but one out of every 2 people who turns 21 today is a multicultural consumer.
Hey, why don't I jump in? I can ask these questions for you guys so you don't have to read them and answer them. So when dealing with overwhelming data, important to keep in mind how decisions will be made. What types of decisions can be made with this demographic data?
All the data that we're talking about? You can make channel strategy decisions. You can create new products understanding what your customer likes and wants. You can build your marketing strategies. You can take your hard-earned marketing dollars and make them much more powerful by knowing where the consumer is, focusing on where you want to advertise and meet them will be a lot based on it, virtually everywhere in the business. And because it's DTC, remember the DTC consumer is the commercial, consumer. And so we have small businesses we work with, we have high-end small work with, we have very large companies we work with, and they're harvesting the DTC data plus other data sets and using this in wholesale to make decisions now. So this is different. We haven't really understood our consumer because before the retail three-tier system, right, was in between. So now virtually every aspect of the business, and this is what players outside our industry do. They start with the consumer. What do you think Amazon does? Kroger is now a data company, not just a grocery.
A good follow-up here. So can you give an example of how one of your best clients is using your data to improve their DTC business?
One example, high-end, smaller brand, just prioritized knowing the potential scores of people on their list when they did their holiday outbound campaigns. Really small brand, not a lot of resources to do it. So instead of just calling the same people that always performed, they stack ranked them in order of potential score, and they went through the list, and they ended up with 10 to 15% lift over what they normally did, just by reprioritizing their resources. Others are using it for reservations before people even show up in the tasting room to understand, oh gosh, I better put my best rep with this best opportunity.
So whoever asked the platform cost to let you meet with MJ offline.
Yeah,
on this one.
take that offline.
Dale, let's switch to you. How concerned are you with the sober curious movement? Do you have any data on the percentage of population that is not drinking 21 plus?
Yeah, if you look at, well, I say I'm very, very concerned, and I think the other thing when we think about young consumers are participating in the wine category. They're just not doing it as frequently, and when they do participate, they're probably not consuming as much. So when we think about that, the sober curious movement is something that is going to impact our business. What was the second part of it, the question? What I would say is on the Wine Market Council, what we've seen actually is that the percentage of non-drinkers in this country is holding very solid. It's not necessarily moving. It is the fact that it's less frequent and less amounts, right? So it is, and also the number one thing on barrier to wine or hurting wine sales is actually just people drinking less alcohol in general. And number two would be that they're just not choosing wine as frequently. They're going into other beverages.
All right, last question. We'll cut everybody loose for lunch. What tools can you recommend to keep data fresh and current? For example, how can we obtain verified information on thousands of contacts who are outdated or deceased? That's a tough question, I think.
Well, we only pull information in on people that are active in the marketplace today. And if you have customers in your list that are no longer with us, they won't get a match back. So it's possible to know that one by one if, to figure that out if you want to. You can also get emails, more current emails. You can get new phone numbers. This is just working with large data houses, which, by the way, big companies in every industry have been doing for decades.
Well, thank you, MJ, and thank you, Dale. Appreciate you guys.